I just found out I'm the fall girl for a $5 million corporate heist. The mastermind? The man sleeping 3 feet away from me. He's already forged my signature. He's already packed his bags. What he doesn't know is that I've been mirrored his phone to this screen for 3 hours. He has 60 seconds before I send his confession to the FBI, or should I let him walk into the trap I just set in the garage first? They say the Florida heat makes people do crazy things. They say the humidity seeps into your brain, swelling your thoughts until you can't see straight. But the heat wasn't what made me pull that heavy, dust-covered suitcase from under the bed at 3 in the morning. It wasn't the midsummer sweat making my hands shake as I packed my life into 3 nylon bags. It was the silence. The silence of a man sleeping soundly in the next room. A man who thought he had finally won. My husband, David. I stood there, listening to the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest through the cracked bedroom door. It was the sound of a man who had no idea that his world, the world I had built for him brick by brick, was about to be dismantled. We worked for the same company, Nexus Systems. In the high-gloss offices of Naples, Florida, we were known as the power couple. He was the senior VP of sales, the charismatic closer, the man with the $2,000 suits and the smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. And me? I was the lead systems architect. I was the engine. I built the code, the infrastructure, the very products he sold. He closed the deals, I built the worlds that made those deals possible. We were a team. Or at least, that's what I told myself for 7 years. I let him take the stage. I let him be the face. I told myself that his success was our success. That a win for David Miller was a win for Maya Miller. How wrong I was. If you're listening to this right now, if you're sitting in the dark, or driving to a job where they don't see you, or lying next to someone who feels like a stranger, you need to listen. And you need to subscribe right now. Don't look away. If you don't, you're just waiting for it to happen to you. You're waiting for the moment you realize you're the ghost in your own life. And for those of you who won't subscribe, go ahead. Enter the comments. Lament about why you're okay with being the shadow. Tell me why you're comfortable being a footnote in someone else's story. I'll wait. It started yesterday. A day that felt like any other Friday. The sun was a white-hot coin in the sky, and the office was buzzing with the news of the retention and performance rewards. These were the big ones. The bonuses meant to keep the key players from jumping ship to our competitor, Vertex. I was at my desk, my eyes stinging from 12 hours of staring at the Aegis protocol, the security system I'd developed from scratch. An email popped up. Personal and confidential. I opened it. $4,500. $4,500. After a year where I billed 3,000 hours. After I stayed up until 4 a.m. fixing the server crashes that would have cost the company millions. After I built the very backbone of the Vertex merger. I felt a sting, a hot flash of shame, but I pushed it down. I told myself it was a lean year. Maybe the margins were tighter than I thought. I was going to walk into David's office and ask him if he got his yet, maybe console him if his was low too. But then, the kitchen island. David had come home early. He was in the shower, the steam rolling out of the master bath, smelling of that expensive sandalwood soap I bought him. His laptop was open. A notification was glowing on the screen like a neon sign in a dark alley. I shouldn't have looked. But the light was so bright. Bonus total, $32,000. Reason, exceptional leadership and client retention. $32,000. For leadership. Leadership over projects I managed. Retention of clients I saved when the system glitched. He was getting the lion's share of the reward for the work I did while he was at 3-hour networking lunches. I stood there in our kitchen, the kitchen with the granite countertops we picked out together, the kitchen I paid for with my last promotion, and I felt like I was disappearing. I looked at the $4,500 on my phone and the $32,000 on his. It wasn't about the money. It never is. It was the realization that I wasn't his partner. I was his employee. Worse. I was his ghostwriter. And the company? They didn't see a genius architect. They saw a loyal wife who would never leave. They saw a woman they could underpay because her husband would make up the difference in his own ego. I looked at the wedding photo on the wall. David was laughing, his arm around me. I looked so happy. So safe. But looking at it now, with that $32,000 glowing behind me, I didn't see love. I saw Hunter and his prize. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop. I didn't even wake him up to confront him. I know David. If I confronted him, he'd use that sales VP voice. He'd tell me it was corporate optics. He'd tell me he'd put that money into our joint savings. He'd gaslight me until I felt guilty for being upset. No. I wasn't going to talk. Talking is for people who want to fix things. I wanted to break things. I went to the garage and grabbed my toolkit. I went to the basement where the home server sits, the one that mirrors my work at the office. See, David forgot one thing. He might be the face of Nexus Systems, but I am the nervous system. Every line of code, every security handshake, every backdoor into the Aegis protocol, it all belongs to me. I didn't just build it for the company. I built it so that it needed me to breathe. I sat down at the terminal. My fingers moved across the keys, a familiar dance. Okay, David, I whispered. You want to see what exceptional leadership looks like? Let's see how you lead a company that can't open its own front door. As I began the initial lockout, a shadow fell over the basement stairs. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Maya? It was David. He was standing at the top of the stairs, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair damp. What are you doing down there? It's 2 a.m, babe. I closed the laptop lid just as the encryption progress bar hit 15%. I looked up at him, forcing a smile that felt like it was breaking my face. Just some last-minute bugs, honey, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. Go back to bed. Tomorrow is a big day. Yeah, he said, leaning against the frame, a smug look in his eyes. A very big day. Don't work too hard. You know you're not getting paid for the overtime. He turned and walked away. To understand why I was sitting in a dark basement at 2 a.m. plotting the digital demise of my own husband, you have to understand how we got here. You have to understand the slow, agonizing erosion of a woman's worth. I remember the day I got David the job at Nexus Systems. It was 3 years ago. Florida was mid-monsoon, the sky a bruised purple, much like my heart feels now. David was struggling. He'd been let go from a mid-level firm in Tampa. He was between opportunities, which is corporate speak for no one wants to hire a guy who talks more than he delivers. I was already the golden girl at Nexus. I had developed the first iteration of the Aegis protocol, a system designed to protect high-frequency trading data. It was revolutionary. It was my baby. I had the ear of the CEO, Bill Hendricks. I remember sitting in Bill's office, the smell of expensive leather and Davidoff cigars thick in the air. Bill, I said, leaning forward. My husband, David, he's a closer. He has the charisma that our technical team lacks. If you bring him on as VP of Sales, I can focus on the architecture, and he can translate it for the board. We'll be a package deal. I put my entire reputation on the line for him. I vouched for his integrity. I vouched for his work ethic. I basically handed him the keys to the kingdom. I didn't realize I was building my own prison. Within 6 months, the shift began. It was subtle at first. A correction here. A suggestion there. We would be at a dinner with potential investors. I would start explaining the latency reduction algorithms I'd spent 6 months perfecting. David would gently place his hand over mine, a gesture that looked like affection to everyone else, but felt like a shackle to me. What Maya is trying to say, he'd interrupt with a charming chuckle, is that the system is fast. Really fast. Think of it like a Ferrari, but for your data. The investors would laugh. They'd stop looking at me and start looking at him. David would wink at me, as if we were in on a joke together. But the joke was always on me. He was stripping away the complexity of my genius and replacing it with sound bites. He was making me palatable for a world that didn't want to hear a woman talk about binary code. One night, after a particularly successful launch, I confronted him in the car. David, why do you keep cutting me off? I'm the lead architect. I need them to understand the technical security of the protocol. He didn't even look at me. He just kept his eyes on the road, a small, patronizing smile on his face. Babe, you're too close to it, he said, his voice smooth as silk. You get into the weeds. People don't buy seeds, Maya. They buy the garden. I'm just selling the garden. It's better for both of us if I'm the face. It keeps the pressure off you. The pressure? I asked. Or the credit? He pulled the car over. The silence in that Lexus was deafening. Maya, he said, his voice dropping to that low, serious tone he used for closing deals. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be successful? Because if I don't sell this, your genius code is just a hobby in a darkroom. Don't let your ego ruin our future. Our future. That was the phrase he used every time he wanted me to disappear. And like a fool, I listened. I shrank myself so he could stand taller. The early conflict moved from social settings to the corporate structure itself. I was up for the senior director of engineering position. I had the metrics. I had the patents. But the board meeting came and went, and the promotion went to a man named Marcus, a guy who couldn't explain the difference between a firewall and a toaster, but he played golf with David and Bill every Sunday. I found David in the kitchen that night, pouring a glass of scotch. "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know they were giving it to Marcus?" David took a slow sip, his eyes avoiding mine. "It was a strategic move, Maya. Marcus is a culture fit for the board. Besides, if you're a senior director, we'd have a reporting conflict of interest. It would actually hurt my path to senior VP." I felt the air leave my lungs. "So, I have to stay in the basement so you can move to the penthouse?" "It's not the basement, Maya. It's the engine room. Without you, the ship doesn't move. But someone has to be on the bridge." That was the night I realized David didn't see me as his wife. He saw me as a proprietary asset. I was a tool in his shed, a piece of software he owned by virtue of a marriage license. But the real conflict, the one that finally broke the dam, happened 3 months ago. I was working on the Vertex integration. It was the biggest deal in Nexus history. If we pulled this off, the company would triple in value. I found a massive security flaw in the Vertex API, a backdoor that could allow a hacker to wipe the entire database. I brought it to David. I told him we had to delay the announcement by 2 weeks so I could patch it. "No," David said, slamming his hand on the desk. "We announce on Monday. The stock needs the boost. David, it's not safe. If I don't fix this, the system is a ticking time bomb. Then fix it quietly, Maya. Don't tell Bill. Don't tell the board. Just handle it. That's what I pay you for." "You don't pay me, David. The company does." He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "I brought you into this inner circle, Maya. I protected your job when they wanted to outsource the engineering. You owe me your loyalty. Fix the bug, keep your mouth shut, and let me handle the business." That was the moment. The conflict wasn't just professional anymore. It was a war for my soul. So, when I saw that $32,000 bonus yesterday, when I saw the exceptional leadership reward for a man who told me to compromise my integrity to save his stock options, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt liberated. Because the engine room he loved so much? I was about to set it on fire. I stood in that dark basement, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I looked at the progress bar for the legacy update I was writing. 35% complete. I heard the floorboards creak above me. David was moving around. He was getting a glass of water. He thought he was the king of the castle. He didn't realize that I had already changed the locks on his kingdom. And then, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Maya, we need to talk. I know what David is planning for the Vertex deal. He's not just taking the credit this time. He's taking the whole company." I stared at the text message on my burner phone. The screen's glow felt like a spotlight in the suffocating darkness of the basement. "He's taking the whole company." My heart wasn't just pounding, it was echoing. I knew that voice. Even through an anonymous text, I knew the cadence. It was Sarah, David's executive assistant. She had been with him for 2 years, a girl I had mentored, someone I thought was my friend. I thought she was loyal to the power couple. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My fingers were frozen. I turned back to the terminal. If David was taking the company, he wasn't doing it with spreadsheets. He was doing it with my code. I opened the root directory of the Nexus mainframe, the place where the Aegis core was housed. I started digging into the hidden logs, the ones even the CEO didn't know existed. And that's when I saw it. Project Sunfall. It wasn't a folder. It was a parasitic subroutine. It was a shadow version of my Aegis protocol, designed to look like a standard update, but inside was a data siphoning worm. I clicked on the author metadata. I expected to see a rogue hacker or a competitor from Vertex. But the digital signature was unmistakable. It was David's admin credentials, but the actual lines of code, they were a crude, bastardized version of my own work. He had been stealing my snippets, my logic gates, and my security handshakes for months. He wasn't just taking the credit for the sales. He was building a backdoor into the entire company's infrastructure. He was planning to leak the security flaw I had warned him about, the one I told him would ruin us, to Vertex. But he wasn't going to let them hack us. He was going to solve the problem by offering them the Sunfall patch, a patch he would sell them privately for millions of dollars, effectively bankrupting Nexus and leaving Bill Hendricks with the wreckage. I leaned back, the cheap plastic chair creaking in the silence. He wasn't just stealing a bonus. He was stealing the entire legacy of my work to buy himself a seat at a different table. A table I wasn't invited to. I found the offer letter in his hidden temp files. It was from the CEO of Vertex. Dear David, we are prepared to offer you the Chief Technology Officer position and a $5 million consulting fee upon the successful transition of the Aegis Sunfall assets. We understand your wife will remain with Nexus to manage the fallout. Manage the fallout. That's what I was to him. The cleanup crew. The woman who stays behind to sweep the floors while the man flies away in a private jet. Suddenly, the basement door creaked. Not a floorboard above me this time, the door itself. I didn't have time to hide the screen. I didn't have time to close the laptop. I just froze. The light from the kitchen spilled down the stairs. David was standing there. He wasn't wearing his towel anymore. He was fully dressed in his suit, the dark navy one he wore for kill shots. Maya, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I saw the server logs hit my phone. You're poking around in places that don't belong to you. I stood up, my back against the server rack. The heat from the machines was radiating through my shirt. Places that don't belong to me, David? I built these places. Every line of Sunfall is a mutilated version of my brain. You didn't even have the talent to steal it properly. He walked down the stairs, one slow step at a time. He didn't look like my husband. He looked like a predator who had finally been caught with his claws in the meat. Sunfall is our retirement, Maya, he said, stopping at the bottom of the stairs. Nexus is a sinking ship. Bill is an idiot who doesn't understand what we have. I'm just optimizing our exit. Our exit? I spat. The offer letter says CTO for you. It says a consulting fee for you. It says I stay here to handle the lawsuits when the security flaw destroys the lives of our clients. I was going to bring you over later, he lied, his eyes darting to the screen. Once the dust settled. You're being emotional. You're not seeing the big picture. The big picture, I said, my voice hardening into ice, is that you're a thief, David. And you're not even a good one. I reached behind me and hit the enter key on my terminal. What did you just do? He barked, lunging toward the desk. I didn't delete Sunfall, I said, stepping aside as he scrambled for the keyboard. I did something better. I finalized the legacy update I was working on earlier. David stared at the screen. His face went from arrogant to ghostly white. The encryption. He whispered. It's changing. It's a rotating biometric lock, David, I said, walking toward the stairs. I just tied the entire Aegis core, including your Sunfall worm, to my own heartbeat. If I'm not logged in, if I'm not part of the system, the whole thing stays locked. You can't sell it. You can't use it. You can't even show it to Vertex. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. You can't do this. That's company property. I'll call Bill. I'll have you fired. Call him, I said, pausing on the first step. Tell him why the lead architect locked the servers. Tell him about Project Sunfall. I'm sure he'd love to hear how his VP of sales was planning to bankrupt him at 10 a.m. tomorrow. I walked up the stairs, leaving him in the dark with the blinking red lights of the servers. But as I reached the kitchen, I realized I had made a mistake. My car keys. They weren't on the counter. And then I heard the sound of a heavy engine roaring to life in the driveway. The roar of the engine wasn't my SUV. It was David's. He wasn't trying to stop me from leaving, he was trying to beat me to the one place he thought he could still salvage his deal. He was heading to the secondary data center, a small, nondescript office in North Naples that I had set up as a failsafe years ago. He thought the physical servers there would let him bypass the biometric lock. He thought he could outrun the woman who had mapped every digital artery in his life. I stood in the kitchen, my chest heaving. The silence of the house was now punctuated by the ticking of the stovetop clock and the distant splash of the pool outside. I was alone. Truly alone. The man I had shared a bed with for 7 years had just looked me in the eye and told me my life's work was his retirement fund. I looked down at the kitchen counter. My car keys were gone. He'd swiped them. It was a classic David move, low, petty, and designed to leave me stranded and helpless while he played the hero. He wanted me to sit here, crying in the dark, waiting for him to come home and tell me he fixed everything. I leaned against the counter, my forehead touching the cool granite. I remembered when we bought this house. We had stood right here, drinking cheap champagne out of plastic cups, talking about where we'd put the Christmas tree. I remember him kissing my temple and whispering, "Everything I do for us, Maya." I realized now that us was a brand name. It was a marketing strategy. But David forgot something. He forgot that I didn't need the SUV. I had my work-from-home emergency kit in my laptop bag. And I had the spare key to the old, beat-up truck we kept in the detached garage, the one he called an eyesore and wanted me to sell months ago. I grabbed my bag, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. I threw in my external drives, my passport, and a single-framed photo from the hallway, not of us, but of my father, the man who taught me how to build my first computer when I was 8 years old. "Never let a machine own you, Maya," he used to say. "And never let a man tell you how the machine works." I stepped out into the humid Florida night. The rain was coming down in sheets now, a tropical deluge that turned the driveway into a river. I ran for the detached garage, the water soaking through my shirt in seconds. I climbed into the truck. The engine groaned, a rusty, mechanical protest, but it turned over. I backed out into the street, my headlights cutting through the silver wall of rain. I checked my phone. I had a GPS tracker on the company servers. A red dot was moving fast toward North Naples. David. But then, I saw a second dot. A blue dot, moving from the direction of the CEO's estate in Port Royal. It was Bill Hendricks. They were meeting. At 3:30 in the morning. David hadn't just gone to the data center to bypass me, he had called the boss. He was going to sell me out before the sun came up. He was going to tell Bill I had gone rogue and sabotaged the company out of spite. I drove through the empty streets of Naples, the palm trees swaying like frantic ghosts in the wind. Every landmark I passed felt like a memory I was setting on fire. The bistro where we had our first date. The park where he proposed. The office building where I gave him my best ideas so he could look like a star. I felt a wave of nausea. I had been so complicit in my own disappearance. I had polished the cage he kept me in. As I turned onto the highway, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a Saturday morning, someone was heading home from a late shift. But then, the car sped up. It drew closer, the high beams blinding me through the rain-streaked glass. I changed lanes. The car changed lanes. I slowed down. The car slowed down. It wasn't the police. And it wasn't David. My phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Maya, pull over. You're not the only one David lied to. We have the evidence you're missing." I looked at the car behind me. It was a silver sedan. Sarah's car. I didn't pull over. I couldn't trust anyone. For all I knew, David had sent her to intercept me. To take my laptop. To take the biometric key. I floored the old truck. The engine screamed, the speedometer climbing slowly. I had to get to the data center first. I had to show Bill the Sunfall code before David could delete the metadata. I had to prove that the golden boy was the one who had poisoned the well. But then, the silver sedan pulled alongside me. Sarah rolled down her window, screaming something over the roar of the wind and rain. She was holding up a manila envelope. I glanced at it for a split second. Written on the front in bold, black marker was a name I hadn't heard in years. Project Aegis Original Patent Filing, 2018. The breath hitched in my throat. I had been told that patent was lost in a filing error. David told me he'd handled the refiling and that the company owned it. Sarah pointed toward a nearby 24-hour diner, her face desperate. The Sunrise Diner was a neon island in a sea of Florida rain. The air inside smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax, a stark contrast to the humid, electrified night outside. I sat in a corner booth, my soaked shirt clinging to my back. My laptop bag was tucked firmly between my feet. Sarah sat across from me. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands were trembling as she pushed that manila envelope across the Formica table. "I've been David's assistant for 2 years, Maya," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the window. "I've seen how he looks at you when you're not looking. He doesn't see a wife. He sees an obstacle. A liability." I opened the envelope. My hands felt numb. Inside were the original patent filings for Aegis. I scanned the lines, the technical jargon blurring before my eyes until I hit the signature line. This isn't possible. The original filing from 2018 didn't have my name on it. Not as an inventor. Not as a contributor. David had filed the paperwork while I was in the hospital recovering from surgery that year. He told me he was handling the administrative headache so I could rest. Instead, he had listed himself as the sole creator and Bill Hendricks as the co-owner. I had spent 3 years perfecting a system that, on paper, I didn't even own. It gets worse, Sarah said, leaning in. Look at the second tab. The Sunfall exit strategy. I flipped the page. It wasn't just a plan to move to Vertex. It was a liquidation map. David had been setting up a series of shell companies in my name, using my forged signature to take out massive business loans. He was funneling the cash into the offshore Cayman accounts, but the debt was tied to me. If Project Sunfall went through, David would fly to Chicago with $5 million and a clean slate. I would be left in Florida, fired from a bankrupt company, facing millions of dollars in personal liability for loans I never signed for. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to bury me so deep I'd never see the light of day again. Why are you telling me this, Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of fury and fear. You've been his right hand. You could have just stayed quiet and taken a payout. Sarah looked down at her coffee. Because I saw the disposition file, Maya. He has a plan for me, too. I'm the witness who's supposed to tell the police that you were the one embezzling the funds. He has emails ready to be discovered on my computer, emails that look like you were blackmailing him. She looked up, tears brimming in her eyes. He's a monster, Maya. He's not just a salesman. He's a predator who uses people until there's nothing left but bone. I felt a cold, hard clarity settle over me. The heartbreak was gone, replaced by a clinical, razor-sharp need for justice. David thought he was playing a game of checkers. He thought he could move me around the board like a wooden piece. He forgot that I built the board. Sarah, I said, grabbing her hand. Does David know you have these? He thinks they're in his private safe at the North Naples office. Good, I said, standing up. Because that's exactly where we're going. He's on his way there now with Bill. They're going to try to force a server override. But the biometric lock, Sarah stammered. You said it's tied to your heartbeat. It is, I said, a dark smile spreading across my face. But there's a super user override built into the physical hardware. If they have the original patent keys and the server access, they can wipe my biometric signature in under 10 minutes. I looked at the clock. 4:05 a.m. We have 20 minutes to get to the data center. If we don't, David doesn't just win, he erases me from existence. As we ran back out to the trucks, the rain suddenly stopped, leaving the world in a terrifyingly quiet mist. In the distance, I saw a flash of blue and red lights. It wasn't the police. It was the private security detail for Nexus Systems. Bill Hendricks's personal fixers. And they were heading straight for the diner. Go! I screamed at Sarah. Get to the lawyer's office with those papers. I'll lead them away. I jumped into the old truck and floored it, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt. I saw the security SUVs swing around, their headlights locking onto my bumper. I didn't head for the highway. I headed for the one place David would never expect me to go. The main Nexus headquarters. The main Nexus headquarters loomed out of the mist like a monolith of glass and steel. To anyone else, it was an office building. To me, it was a living organism, one I had designed from the ground up. David and Bill were at the North Naples Satellite Data Center, thinking they could bypass the super-user override there. They were wrong. The North Naples site was just a relay. The true master logs, the ones that tracked every keystroke, every administrative forgery, and every Project Sunfall file transfer, were stored in the main HQ's air-gapped basement vault. I pulled the old truck into the shadow of the loading dock. The security SUVs that had been chasing me from the diner had lost me 2 miles back when I took a service road meant only for delivery trucks. I knew the blind spots of the cameras better than the men watching the monitors. I stepped out of the truck, the humid air sticking to my skin. I didn't use my keycard. David would have deactivated it the moment he realized I was gone. Instead, I pulled a small, hand-soldered device from my bag, a frequency emulator. I placed it against the service entrance reader. The light turned green. A small victory, but in this house of cards, every small victory felt like a landslide. I moved through the darkened hallways, my sneakers silent on the polished marble. I didn't take the elevators, they were logged. I took the maintenance stairs. My heart was a steady drum, no longer frantic. I was in my element now. In the world of logic gates and encrypted paths, David Miller was a child playing with matches. I reached the server vault door. It was a 4-foot-thick slab of reinforced steel. To open it, you needed two things, a physical key and a digital handshake. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the physical key. David thought he had the only one in his office safe. He didn't know I'd had a duplicate made 3 years ago when I first suspected he was skimming from the development budget. I slid the key in. Then, I opened my laptop and connected to the port. The screen flickered to life. Access denied. Invalid credentials. I froze. My breath hitched. If my credentials were dead, it meant Bill had already initiated a nuclear lockdown. He wasn't just trying to bypass me, he was trying to wipe me from the system entirely. But I wasn't using my credentials. I began typing. I wasn't logging in as Maya Miller, lead architect. I was logging in as root_ghost, a backdoor account I'd hidden in the kernel code the day the company was founded. It was my insurance policy. Handshake confirmed. Welcome, creator. I was in. I began the small victories protocol. First, I accessed the payroll server. I found David's pending $32,000 bonus. I didn't delete it. I redirected the routing. I moved the funds into a compliance escrow account, a legal black hole that requires a third-party audit to release. Next, I found the forged loan documents Sarah had mentioned. I didn't just find them, I found the metadata proving they were uploaded from David's personal iPad while he was at his golf club. I began a shadow mirror. Every bit of data I found was being copied to an encrypted offshore drive and a secondary BCC to the firm's external legal counsel. Suddenly, the lights in the vault flickered. The cooling fans hummed louder, a high-pitched whine that signaled a massive power draw. On my screen, a red alert appeared. Remote override detected, North Naples Data Center. They were doing it. David and Bill were at the satellite site, and they were trying to force a factory reset on the Aegis core. If they succeeded, my root_ghost account would be purged, and all the evidence I was currently mirroring would be incinerated. I looked at the progress bar for my mirror. 62% complete. Come on, I whispered, my eyes burning. Just 3 more minutes. Then, I heard it. The sound of heavy boots on the stairs outside. The security team hadn't lost me. They had just been waiting for me to lead them to the heart of the machine. A voice boomed through the door's intercom. Maya, we know you're in there. Bill wants to talk. Step away from the terminal and open the door, or we'll be forced to use the emergency breach. I didn't answer. I looked at the screen. 75%. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small canister of liquid nitrogen I'd borrowed from the hardware lab. I didn't use it on the door. I used it on the server rack's main intake. If they wanted to breach the room, they were going to have to do it through a wall of sub-zero fog and a system I was about to turn into a digital trap. The air in the vault was turning freezing. The liquid nitrogen I'd sprayed was doing its job, creating a thick, swirling fog that obscured the monitors and made my own breath come out in ragged white puffs. But the sound from the other side of the door was getting louder. They weren't just knocking anymore, they were using a hydraulic ram. My eyes were locked on the progress bar. 88%. 89%. Maya! This is your last warning, the security chief's voice crackled through the intercom. Bill is on the line. He says if you stop now, we can keep the police out of this. It's just a technical disagreement. Don't throw your life away for a company that's already moving on. Moving on. The words felt like a physical weight. I didn't care about Bill's threats. I was staring at a new window that had just popped up on my screen. While the shadow mirror was pulling David's files, it had stumbled upon a subdirectory encrypted with a 256-bit military-grade key. It was a key I didn't recognize. It wasn't David's. It wasn't Bill's. It was a key I had only seen once before, on the private laptop of my own father before he passed away. My fingers flew across the keyboard, trembling not from the cold, but from a sudden, visceral fear. I bypassed the secondary layer. The folder opened. Inside were files dating back 10 years. Before Nexus. Before David. It was a series of correspondences between David Miller and my sister, Elena. Elena. The black sheep of the family. The one who had vanished 5 years ago after a dispute over our father's estate. I thought she was in Europe. I thought she hated the tech world. But the emails told a different story. David hadn't met me by accident at that tech mixer 7 years ago. He had been placed there. Elena had provided him with my father's original research, the research that became the foundation for Aegis, and instructed David on exactly how to win my heart. I read the words, and they felt like acid on my soul. "She's lonely, David," one email from Elena read. "She's brilliant, but she wants to be seen. Just tell her she's the brain and you're the heart. She'll give you everything. Just make sure the patents stay in your name. We'll split the Vertex payout when the time is right." My entire marriage. My entire career. It wasn't just a husband's greed. It was a long-game execution. My sister had sold my father's legacy to a man who didn't even know how to code, just to spite me for being the favorite child. Bam! The vault door groaned. A hairline fracture appeared in the doorframe. I looked at the screen. Mirror 100% complete. I snatched the encrypted drive from the port and shoved it into my inner pocket. But I wasn't done. If David and Elena had been planning this for a decade, then the Sunfall worm wasn't just a data siphon. It was a trap for me, too. I checked the code one last time. I found the execute command for Sunfall. It wasn't set to trigger at 10 a.m. It was set to trigger the moment I, root_ghost, logged out of the system. They knew I would come here. They knew I had a backdoor. David hadn't just gone to the satellite office to override me, he went there to wait for me to trip the wire. The moment I left this vault, the system would self-destruct, and it would look like I was the one who pulled the trigger. "You bastards," I hissed. I looked at the liquid nitrogen canister. There was still a little left. I didn't leave. I didn't log out. Instead, I opened a global broadcast channel, the one used for emergency company-wide alerts. I turned on my webcam. I looked into the lens, my face pale, my hair matted with sweat and condensation, the fog of the nitrogen swirling behind me like a storm. "Bill. David. Elena," I said, my voice echoing through every speaker in every Nexus office across the globe. "I know you're watching. And I know you're waiting for me to log out so you can blame the crash on me." I held up the encrypted drive. "I have the emails, Elena. I have the patent forgeries, David. And Bill? I have the proof that you've been paying David's consulting fees out of the employee pension fund." Through the intercom, I heard a sudden silence. No more ramming. No more shouting. Then, a new voice came through the speaker. A voice I hadn't heard in years. "Hello, Maya," Elena said. Her voice was smooth, cold, and entirely devoid of remorse. "You always were too smart for your own good. But you're forgetting one thing. You're currently in a locked vault with no oxygen and a security team with a breach warrant. How long do you think you can stay logged in?" I looked at the oxygen sensor on the wall. 14%. It was dropping fast because of the nitrogen displacement. "Long enough to change the world, Elena," I said. I hit a command I had prepared but hoped I'd never use. "Initiate, public domain release." The oxygen sensor chirped a low, warning note, 12%. My head was starting to feel heavy, a dull ache blooming behind my eyes, but the adrenaline was a cold fire in my veins. I wasn't just a wife or an architect anymore. I was a grandmaster at a board where my opponents had just realized all their pieces were pinned. "Public domain release?" Bill's voice crackled through the intercom, his tone shifting from aggression to absolute, unadulterated panic. "Maya, don't be insane. If you release the Aegis source code to the public, the company is worthless. The Vertex deal dies. Your shares die. You'll be penniless." "I'm already penniless, Bill," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears as the thinning air took its toll. "I have 42 cents in my bank account." David saw to that. "You can't threaten a woman who has already reached the bottom." I watched the monitor. The public domain release wasn't a bluff, but it wasn't a suicide mission either. It was a timed execution. I had set a dead man's switch. If my heartbeat, monitored by the biometric sensor I was still gripping, stopped, or if the root_ghost account was forcibly terminated from the North Naples site, the code would be uploaded to every major open-source repository on the planet. I had effectively turned myself into a digital hostage. "Here's what is going to happen," I said, leaning into the webcam. I began typing with one hand, my fingers flying as I drafted a new set of legal directives. "Elena, I know you're listening from wherever you're hiding. You want the Vertex payout? It's gone. David? The Sunfall exit is closed. Bill? You have 60 seconds to call off your security team and give me remote access to the North Naples terminal." "And why would I do that?" Bill spat. "I'll just wait for you to pass out from lack of oxygen." Because, I replied, a jagged smile cutting through the fog, I just sent a compressed file to the Vertex acquisition team. It's not the code. It's the audit trail of the employee pension fund you've been raiding. If I don't send the deauthorization key in the next 5 minutes, that file automatically decrypts in their inbox. You won't just be bankrupt, Bill. You'll be the headline of a federal indictment. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Bill's head as he weighed his greed against his freedom. Suddenly, the pounding on the vault door stopped. The heavy vibrations of the hydraulic ram ceased. The guards are stepping back, Bill's voice came through, sounding defeated, old. I'm giving you the North Naples access. Just, please, Maya. Don't destroy the firm. I didn't answer him. I saw the prompt appear on my screen, remote access granted, Site 02. I was now in control of the very terminal where David was sitting. I opened the webcam on his end. David was there. He looked smaller through the grain of the security camera. He was frantically hitting keys, trying to stop the dead man's switch I'd planted. He looked up and saw me on his own monitor. Maya, listen to me, he started, his sales VP voice shaking. We can fix this. Elena, she manipulated me, too. She told me you were going to leave me. I was just trying to protect us. Shut up, David, I said. I'm looking at the offshore routing numbers. You weren't protecting us. You were protecting a version of your life that didn't include me. I began the infrastructure devastation. I didn't release the code to the public, not yet. Instead, I initiated a corporate coup. Using the root_go's privileges and the newly granted admin access, I drafted an emergency resolution for the board of directors. I attached the evidence of Bill's embezzlement and David's Sunfall treason. I set the sender address to Bill's own private, encrypted email. It would look like a confession. A total, systemic surrender. Maya, what are you doing? David screamed, watching his screen as his credentials were stripped away one by one. You're deleting my access. You're deleting the Sunfall files. I'm not deleting them, David, I said, my vision beginning to blur as the oxygen sensor hit 9%. I'm archiving them for the FBI. If you think this is just a story, look at your own career. Look at the person who takes the credit for your late nights. Subscribe now, or keep playing the loyal partner until they hand you a suitcase and a 42-cent balance. Don't wait until you're in a vault with no air to realize you were the one holding the oxygen for everyone else. I felt my knees buckle. The cold from the nitrogen was seeping into my bones. I had the evidence. I had the leverage. But I was running out of time. Maya, a new voice broke through the intercom. It was Sarah. Maya, the police are here. I brought the lawyer and the detectives from the diner. They're at the vault door. Open it. I reached for the door release, but my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. On the screen, I saw David stand up. He grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall of the data center. He wasn't looking at the computer anymore. He was looking at the door. He knew the police were coming for him. And he knew there was only one person who could testify to the root_ghost logs. He's coming back to the HQ, I realized. He's not running away. He's coming to finish it. I hit the manual release for the vault door just as my vision went black. The last thing I heard was the hiss of the pressure seal breaking and the sound of running footsteps. Consciousness didn't return all at once. It came in shards. The taste of copper in my mouth. The freezing bite of the tile floor against my cheek. The smell of ozone and burnt silicon. I opened my eyes. The vault door was wide open, swaying slightly on its massive hinges. The fog of the nitrogen had thinned, revealing the carnage of my small victory. Server racks were frosted over, blinking red lights struggling to stay alive. Maya? The voice was a rasp. I rolled onto my back, my lungs screaming as they finally gulped in oxygen-rich air. I saw a silhouette standing in the doorway, framed by the harsh fluorescent lights of the hallway. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't a detective. It was David. He looked like a ghost. His expensive navy suit was torn at the shoulder, his face smeared with grease and sweat. He wasn't carrying the fire extinguisher anymore. He was holding my laptop, the one I'd left connected to the master port. You really did it, he whispered, stepping into the vault. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hollow. You burned the bridge while you were still standing on it. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt like lead. It's over, David. The mirror is complete. The board, the FBI, they have everything. David let out a low, chilling laugh that vibrated in the small room. Do they? Because the North Naples site just went dark, Maya. I didn't try to stop your upload. I let it finish. I frowned, confusion cutting through the hypoxia. What are you talking about? David knelt down beside me, his eyes wide and unfocused. He turned the laptop screen toward me. I expected to see the root_goes success message. Instead, I saw a string of code I didn't recognize. A recursive loop that was eating through the very files I had just mirrored. You think you're the only one who knows how to build a backdoor? David asked. Elena didn't just give me your father's research. She gave me the counter sequence. The room felt like it was spinning. My father, he always talked about the Omega handshake, a theoretical failsafe that could render any encrypted data into white noise. He told me he'd destroyed it because it was too dangerous. He hadn't destroyed it. He had given it to Elena. The files you sent to the board? The ones you sent to the feds? David smiled, and it was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. By the time they open them, they'll be nothing but digital garbage. And the root_ghost logs? They've been rewritten. As of 5 minutes ago, the system shows you initiating the Sunfall protocol to frame me because I was planning to divorce you. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Every move I'd made, the vault, the mirror, the public domain release, had been anticipated. I wasn't the cat in this game. I was the mouse, and I had just run straight into the center of the trap. Where is she, David? I rasped. Where is Elena? David's smile faded. He looked toward the open door. She's in the lobby, Maya. She's with Bill. And they're waiting for the police to arrive so they can hand them the distraught wife who tried to blow up the company. But then, David's hand began to shake. He looked at the laptop screen again. A new alert was flashing, one he clearly didn't expect. System overheat, core temperature critical. I looked at the server racks. The ice from the nitrogen was melting rapidly, but the fans weren't spinning. I hadn't just frozen the hardware, I had jammed the mechanical cooling vents with the emulator. David, I said, my voice gaining strength. You might have the counter sequence, but you don't have the cooling overrides. In 3 minutes, the physical processors in this room are going to melt. The Omega code won't matter if there's no silicon left to run it on. David scrambled for the keyboard, his fingers frantic. Fix it. Maya, fix it. All the data, the patents, the money, it's all on these drives. Let it burn, I said, pulling myself up against the wall. If I go down, I'm taking the house, the company, and your retirement with me. Suddenly, the laptop screen didn't just flash red. It turned white. A high-frequency screech erupted from the speakers, a sound so loud it made David drop the computer. A video feed forced its way onto the monitor. It wasn't the office. It was a sterile, white room. Elena was there. But she wasn't in the lobby. She was sitting in a jet, the engines whining in the background. David, you idiot, Elena's voice filled the vault. Did you really think I'd let you keep half? The counter sequence didn't just scramble the evidence. It transferred the Sunfall funds to my private account and triggered the thermal purge. I don't need a partner anymore. I have the legacy. David stared at the screen, his mouth open in a silent scream of betrayal. He looked at me, then at the burning servers, then back at the woman on the screen who had just erased him. Maya, David whispered, his voice trembling. What have we done? The first spark jumped from the main rack. The fire alarm finally screamed to life, and the overhead sprinklers began to hiss. Through the mist and the fire, I saw a figure running down the hall toward the vault. It wasn't a guard. It was Sarah, and she was holding a heavy black case I'd never seen before. Maya! The physical backups, she yelled. I got them out of his safe before he could wipe. The vault was no longer a sanctuary, it was an oven. The smell of burning plastic and ozone was thick enough to choke on. Sarah was standing at the threshold, her face ghost white, clutching a ruggedized black pelican case to her chest like it was a holy relic. Maya, we have to go. Now, she screamed over the wail of the sirens. I looked at David. He was still on his knees, staring at the screen where Elena, our sister, his conspirator, had just vanished into the digital ether. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. The silver tongue had finally run out of lies. David, get up! I yelled, grabbing the sleeve of his navy suit. Even now, after everything, the instinct to save him was a dull ache in my chest. The fire suppression system isn't using water, it's using halon gas. If we stay here, we'll suffocate in 60 seconds. He didn't move. He looked at the melting server racks, the liquid nitrogen ice now turning into steaming puddles on the floor. She took it all, Maya, he whispered. 10 years, she took it all. She didn't take the backups in Sarah's hand, I said, my voice hardening. Now move, or die in your own grave. I grabbed my laptop, the screen cracked but still flickering, and shoved it into my bag. We bolted from the vault just as the heavy halon canisters hissed into life, a ghostly white mist filling the room behind us. We ran through the darkened hallways, the emergency red lights strobing against the glass walls. We reached the lobby. The glass doors were locked down, the security shutters sealed. But through the gaps, I could see the flashing lights of a dozen police cruisers. Bill Hendricks was out there, talking to a detective, gesturing wildly toward the building. He was setting the stage, telling them his rogue employee had set a bomb. We can't go out the front, Sarah panted, her eyes wide. They'll arrest us before we can even open the case. The loading dock, I said. The service road leads to the canal. If we can get to the water, we can get to the old ferry landing. We sprinted toward the back of the building. We were a ragtag trio, a disgraced architect, a terrified assistant, and a broken VP of sales. As we reached the loading dock, a door burst open at the end of the hall. There they are. It was Bill's private security detail. They weren't waiting for the police. They were the cleanup crew. If we left with that case, Bill's embezzlement and Elena's theft would be common knowledge. Give us the case, Maya, one of the guards shouted, drawing a stun baton. Bill just wants the hardware. You can walk away. I didn't stop. I hit the button for the heavy rolling garage door. It groaned, rising with agonizing slowness. I looked at David. For the first time that night, his eyes cleared. He looked at the guards, then at me. Go, he said, his voice low. David, what are you doing? He stepped toward the guards, his hands raised, but his posture wasn't one of surrender. It was a distraction. Hey! You want to talk about hardware? Let's talk about the offshore accounts Bill didn't tell you guys about. The ones he's using to pay his lawyers while your paychecks bounce next week. The guards hesitated. In that split second of doubt, the rolling door cleared the floor by 3 feet. Now, Sarah. Slide. We scrambled under the door, the cold Florida rain hitting us like a wall. We didn't look back. We ran for the old truck I'd left in the shadows. I threw the Pelican case into the footwell and floored the engine. As we tore down the service road, I looked in the rearview mirror. David was being pressed against the wall by the guards, but he was laughing. A wild, broken sound. He had finally done one thing that wasn't for himself. Maya, Sarah whispered, opening the Pelican case. You need to see this. It's not just the backups. There's a physical ledger in here. David was keeping a paper trail of every meeting he had with your sister for the last 5 years. I glanced at the ledger. It wasn't just dates and times. Tucked into the back was a small, encrypted key fob labeled Phoenix. My father's handwriting. He didn't give Elena the counter sequence, I realized, the truck fishtailing as I turned onto the main road. He gave her a version of it. This is the real one. The one that can track the money even after it's been scrambled. Elena thought she was flying away with $5 million. She didn't realize she was carrying a homing beacon. I pulled my phone out. I didn't call the police. I didn't call the board. I called the Vertex acquisition team, the men David had been trying to impress all night. This is Maya Miller, I said, my voice as cold as the rain outside. The deal you were offered for Aegis is dead. But I have an offer for you. How would you like to own the woman who just stole $5 million of your consulting fee? Suddenly, a black sedan swerved in front of us, forcing me to slam on the brakes. I looked up. It wasn't Bill. It wasn't the police. It was a woman standing in the middle of the road, holding a tablet. She looked exactly like me, only her eyes were older, harder. Elena hadn't left on the jet. She had sent a decoy. The world was a bruised shade of gray. The pre-dawn light in Florida doesn't feel like a beginning, it feels like an exposure. I sat behind the wheel of the idling truck, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. 20 feet ahead, framed by the hazy aura of my own headlights, stood Elena. She wasn't wearing the tactical gear of a corporate spy or the expensive silks of a jet-setter. She was wearing a simple trench coat, her hair, my hair, damp and matted against her forehead. She looked like a mirror image of my own soul, warped by a decade of resentment. Get out of the car, Maya, she called out. Her voice didn't need a microphone to carry over the wind. It was the voice of every childhood argument, every silent dinner, every year of distance. I stepped out into the mud. Sarah tried to grab my arm, but I shook her off. This wasn't her war. This was blood on blood. I walked until there were only 10 feet between us. I could see the tablet in her hand. The screen was glowing with the same terminal interface I had used in the vault. The jet was a nice touch, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The thermal purge was even better. You almost had me believing you were halfway to the Caymans. I don't need the Caymans yet, Elena said, her eyes tracing my face with a clinical coldness. I needed to make sure the evidence burned. I needed to see the look on David's face when he realized he was nothing more than a delivery boy. Why, Elena? Dad's research, it was supposed to be a gift to the world. He wanted to secure the future of privacy. He didn't want it to be a weapon used to tear his own daughters apart. Elena let out a sharp, jagged laugh. A gift? Dad was a dreamer, Maya. He spent his life building walls to keep people out, and he left us with nothing but the blueprints. He gave you the talent. He gave you the architect title. And what did he give me? A good luck and a seat in the back row of your graduation. He loved you, I whispered. He used me to test your defenses, she screamed, her composure finally breaking. The tablet shook in her hand. Every glitch you fixed in high school? That was me. Every security test you passed at 19? That was Dad handing me a script and telling me to break your heart so you'd learn to be unbreakable. He turned us into a simulation, Maya. And I decided a long time ago that if I was the virus, I was going to be the one that crashed the whole system. The air felt thinner than it had in the vault. What are you talking about? Dad didn't, he wouldn't. Check the ledger, Maya, she sneered, gesturing toward the Pelican case in the truck. Check the dates from 2015. Dad wasn't sick during that sabbatical. He was consulting for Vertex. He was the one who designed the original Sunfall architecture. He sold the backdoor to the highest bidder 10 years ago to pay for your tuition at MIT. Your entire career was funded by the very theft you think you're fighting. I felt the ground shift. The hero of my childhood, the man who told me never to let a machine own me, had sold the keys to my kingdom before I'd even built the walls. My genius was built on a foundation of his betrayal. It doesn't matter, I said, though my heart felt like it was crumbling. Dad is gone. And David is in that building. But I have the Phoenix key. I have the power to reverse the scramble. Elena's eyes narrowed. She tapped a command on her tablet. You have a plastic fob, Maya. I have the live uplink. If you don't give me that case in the next 60 seconds, I'm not just scrambling the money. I'm triggering the global death on every Aegis-protected server in the state. Hospitals, power grids, banks. I'll turn Florida into the Dark Ages, and I'll tell the world it was your root_ghost account that did it. She was serious. I could see the execute prompt glowing on her screen. She wasn't just after the money anymore, she was after my name. She wanted to prove that she was the superior coder by destroying everything I had ever protected. You'd kill people for a grudge? I asked. I'd kill a legacy to start my own, she replied. The case, Maya. Now. I looked back at Sarah. She was holding the Pelican case, her eyes wide with terror. I looked at the Phoenix key in my hand, the one in my father's handwriting. Then I looked at the tablet. You're right, Elena, I said, taking a step forward. Dad did use us. He turned us into tools. But he forgot one thing about tools. They can be repurposed. I didn't hand her the case. I threw the Phoenix key, not at her, but into the deep, muddy puddle between us. What are you doing? She gasped. The Phoenix key isn't a decryption tool, Elena, I said, a cold smile finally reaching my eyes. It's a ground rod. It's a physical hardware bypass for any tablet within 10 feet of it. As the metal fob hit the water, a blue spark arched from the mud to Elena's tablet. The screen exploded in a shower of white sparks. Elena screamed, dropping the device as it began to melt, the global death command dying in a hiss of electronic smoke. Behind us, the sound of sirens grew deafeningly loud. The police weren't just coming from the HQ. They were coming for us. The smoke from Elena's melted tablet curled into the damp air, smelling of scorched copper and failure. For a second, the world was frozen. My sister was staring at her empty, blackened hands as if she could conjure the code back from the mud. The global death hadn't happened, but neither had my escape. The blue and red lights weren't just reflecting off the puddles anymore, they were illuminating our faces. But as the first vehicle skidded to a halt, it wasn't the blue and white of the Collier County Sheriff. It was a black armored SUV. Bill Hendricks's personal security. Maya! Get in! Sarah screamed from the truck, but it was too late. The SUV doors swung open and Bill Hendricks himself stepped out. He wasn't the polished CEO I'd known for a decade. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with the kind of desperation that only comes to men who have everything to lose. He was holding a compact firearm, leveled directly at the Pelican case in Sarah's lap. "The police are 3 minutes out, Bill," I shouted, standing my ground between him and the truck. "It's over. Give it up." "It's only over if that case leaves this road," Bill rasped. His voice was a jagged edge. "You think I'm going to prison for a pension discrepancy? You think I'm going to let a girl who was supposed to be a loyal wife dismantle a billion-dollar merger?" He looked at Elena, then at me. "The two of you, the Miller sisters. A family of geniuses who couldn't keep their own house in order. Elena, get in the car. We're taking the case and the drive." Elena looked at me, then at Bill. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I used to have, the one who used to share a room with me. But then she looked at the mud, at her destroyed tablet, and back at the man who represented the only win she had left. She started walking toward Bill. "Elena, don't," I whispered. "He'll discard you the second he has the encryption keys. You know how men like him work." "I'd rather be discarded by a winner than saved by you, Maya," she spat. But as she reached for the Pelican case, a new sound cut through the rain. A high-pitched, digital chirp. It was coming from my pocket. My phone. I pulled it out. It was a live feed from the HQ. The fire hadn't just stayed in the vault. Because I'd jammed the cooling vents and the halon had displaced the oxygen, the resulting pressure had blown the secondary gas lines. The entire basement of Nexus Systems was currently a localized inferno. "Bill," I said, my voice trembling. "The servers. They're gone. The physical hardware is melting. The only copy of the Aegis core left in existence is in this case." Bill's face went pale. "What?" "If you shoot Sarah, or if you take this case by force and damage the drives, you have nothing," I said, taking a step toward him. "The Vertex deal isn't just delayed. It's extinct. You're holding a gun to the only thing that can keep you out of a cage." Bill's hand was shaking. He looked at the truck, then at the horizon where the real police sirens were finally wailing. He was caught between two fires, the one he'd started at the office and the one I was stoking right here. "Give me the Phoenix key," Bill demanded. "The one you threw in the mud. I know what it is. I know it has the master override. It's a ground rod, Bill." "It's useless now," I lied. Suddenly, Bill lunged. He didn't go for me. He went for the mud, scrambling like a common thief for the piece of metal I'd tossed. As he bent down, Elena saw her opening. She didn't help him. She grabbed the Pelican case from Sarah's lap and tried to run into the woods. "No!" I tackled my sister into the wet grass. We rolled in the mud, two mirrors of the same face, fighting over a black box that contained our father's sins and our own futures. Bang! A shot rang out. The window of my old truck shattered into 1,000 diamonds. Bill was standing over us, the gun smoking. He hadn't hit anyone, but the message was clear. "The next one goes into the case," Bill screamed. "Both of you, get up. Now." I looked up at him, my face covered in grit. And that's when I saw it. On the dashboard of the truck, my laptop, the one with the cracked screen, was still glowing. Sarah had been typing. She hadn't been sitting there in terror. She had been using the truck's local Wi-Fi hotspot to do the one thing I hadn't thought of. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Bill's SUV. "Maya," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sirens. "The SUV, it's a Nexus fleet vehicle. It's running the Aegis version 1.0 security suite." I realized what she was saying. Bill was driving a car that was controlled by the very code he was trying to steal. "Do it," I breathed. Sarah hit enter. The black SUV's engine didn't just stop. The doors locked. The horn began to blare in a continuous, deafening wall of sound. And then, the airbags deployed with a series of muffled explosions, pinning Bill's guards inside the vehicle. Bill turned, horrified, as his own transport became his prison. "What did you do?" "I updated your software, Bill," I said, standing up and wiping the blood from my lip. "And the new version has a mandatory surrender clause." The red and blue lights finally flooded the clearing, washing over Bill's immobilized SUV and the wreckage of my family. The Collier County Sheriff's deputies swarmed the area, but I didn't move. I didn't drop the Pelican case. I stood there in the rain, looking at Bill Hendricks, who was still clutching a useless gun and a handful of wet mud. "Drop it," the officers screamed. Bill looked at the police, then at me. He saw the laptop in Sarah's hands, still glowing with the override commands. He knew the digital trail was now a highway leading straight to his front door. He dropped the gun. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a sterile interrogation room. But I wasn't the suspect. I was the witness. Across from me sat Detective Andrea and an agent from the SEC. They had the Pelican case, the ledger, and the mirrored files. "Ms. Miller," the SEC agent said, leaning forward. "You've given us a lot of evidence regarding embezzlement and corporate espionage. But David Miller and Bill Hendricks' lawyers are already filing a countersuit. They're claiming that the spousal consent form you signed 4 years ago gives David legal ownership of all your intellectual property. They're saying you're the one who stole from him." I leaned back. I wasn't the broken woman who had packed her bags at 3 a.m. anymore. I was the architect. "You're right," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "In the state of Florida, assets acquired during a marriage are generally marital property." And that agreement? It was very thorough. It covered patents, trademarks, and source code. David thought he had me cornered. He thought the law was a wall I couldn't climb. I pulled a single, folded piece of paper from my pocket. It wasn't a line of code. It was a copy of the very form they were using against me. "But law is just another language," I said. "And every language has a syntax error if you look closely enough. David had me sign this on June 14th, I continued. He told me it was a requirement for our mortgage. But look at the timestamp on the emails I recovered from his private server, the ones I mirrored before the vault burned." I slid a printout across the table. On June 12th, 2 days before I signed, David sent an email to Elena. In it, he detailed his plan to use my waiver to secure the Sunfall assets and move them to an offshore account without my knowledge. He specifically mentioned that he was misleading me about the purpose of the document. The SEC agent frowned. And in Florida," I said, a cold smile touching my lips, "there is a doctrine called fraudulent inducement. If a contract is signed based on an intentional misrepresentation of facts, or if one party is acting in bad faith to facilitate a crime against the other, the entire document is void ab initio." From the beginning. David didn't just plan to take the credit, I said. He planned the embezzlement before the contract even existed. That spousal consent isn't a shield for him, it's a confession. It proves his intent to defraud his partner, not just his business partner, but his wife. I paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "But that's not the secret that destroys them," I whispered. "There's one more thing." David and Bill were so focused on the Aegis version 1.0 patents that they didn't realize I never officially assigned the version 2.0 update to Nexus systems. I wrote the core architecture on a private server under a shell company I started when I was 19, years before I met David. I kept it as a black box project. "Which means," I said, looking the agent in the eye, "the code Vertex actually wants? The code that is currently sitting in that Pelican case? It doesn't belong to Nexus. It doesn't belong to Bill. And it certainly doesn't belong to David. It belongs to Aura Tech Holdings. And I am the 100% owner of Aura Tech." The agent looked at the files, then back at me. "So, the merger." "The merger is dead," I said. "Unless Vertex wants to negotiate with me." And my price just went from a $4,500 bonus to a seat at the head of the table. Suddenly, the door to the interrogation room opened. A junior officer stepped in. "Detective? We have a problem. Elena Miller. She's not in her holding cell." The air in the Collier County Courthouse was thick with the scent of floor wax and the nervous sweat of men who weren't used to losing. I sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a suit I'd bought with the first draw from the Aura Tech escrow. It wasn't palatable. It wasn't designed to make me look like a supportive wife. It was sharp, dark, and looked like armor. Across the aisle, David looked like a shadow of the man who had slept soundly while I packed my bags. His $2,000 suit looked 3 sizes too big. Behind him sat Bill Hendricks, his face a mottled, angry red, flanked by a phalanx of lawyers who were realizing, minute by minute, that their billable hours were going to be paid in worthless Nexus stock. "The defense's motion to dismiss based on marital property rights is denied," the judge's voice boomed. I watched David's shoulders slump. He looked at me, a desperate, pleading glance, the same one he'd used when he forgot our anniversary or when he wanted me to fix a server at midnight. I didn't look back. I looked at the monitor where my evidence was being displayed. My retaliation wasn't just legal, it was systemic. I had spent the last 3 weeks working with the SEC and the Vertex acquisition team. I didn't just want David in jail, I wanted to dismantle the boys' club that had allowed him to thrive. Let the record show, my attorney said, that the spousal consent form was not only fraudulently induced but was used as a vehicle for the embezzlement of $1.2 million in pension funds, as evidenced by the root_ghost audit trail. I stood up when it was my turn to speak. I didn't talk about the heartbreak. I didn't talk about the 7 years of cooking his dinners and debugging his life. I talked about the code. David Miller didn't steal a product from me, I told the court, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. He attempted to steal the infrastructure of the future. He and Mr. Hendricks treated the hard work of 300 engineers as a personal piggy bank. They didn't just defraud me, they defrauded every employee who believed their retirement was safe. Then came the final blow. The one Bill Hendricks never saw coming. Your Honor, I said, as the 100% owner of Auratech and the sole patent holder of the Aegis version 2.0 architecture, I have reached an agreement with Vertex. They are no longer acquiring Nexus systems. They have filed for a predatory breach suit against Mr. Hendricks, and they have signed a direct licensing deal with my firm. Bill Hendricks stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. You can't do that. That's a conflict of interest. The only conflict, Bill, I said, finally turning to look at him, is that you thought you could own the person who built your world. Nexus is bankrupt. As of 10 minutes ago, the board has voted for a total liquidation. David put his head in his hands. He knew what was coming next. The criminal charges. The embezzlement counts. The years in a place where his sales VP charm wouldn't buy him a single favor. But as the bailiff approached to take David into custody for the duration of the trial, I leaned in. I found the other account, David, I whispered. The one Elena didn't tell you about. The one with the $32,000 bonus. He looked up, a spark of hope in his eyes. Maya, please, if you give me that, I can get a better lawyer. I didn't take it, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. I donated it. To a scholarship fund for women in computer science. I'm calling it the Architect's Grant. It's going to fund the next generation of girls who will learn to spot men like you from a mile away. As David was led away in handcuffs, I walked out of the courtroom. Sarah was waiting for me, the Pelican case still in her hand. But she wasn't smiling. Maya, she whispered, handing me a small, handwritten note that had been left on her car windshield. I opened it. The handwriting was familiar. It was the same as the Phoenix key. My sister. The fire didn't burn everything, little sister. Dad had a third daughter. One you've never met. And she has the other half of the key. I looked at the note, the ink blurring in the Florida humidity. Elena was still out there. And the family legacy was a much deeper rabbit hole than I ever imagined. The house felt smaller. It's a strange phenomenon, how a space that once held the weight of an entire marriage, a career, and a future can suddenly feel like nothing more than drywall and overpriced marble. I walked through the foyer of the Naples estate, the air stagnant and warm. The power had been cut to the main HVAC system during the investigation, and the Florida heat was already reclaiming the rooms. I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to purge. I walked into the master bedroom. David's side of the closet was still full of his tailored suits, dark navies, charcoal grays, the armor of a man who sold dreams he didn't own. I didn't feel anger looking at them. I felt a profound, clinical pity. He had spent his life dressing for a part he never truly understood. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the nursery, the room we had kept for later. For years, I thought the delay was about my career. I thought I was the one holding us back from starting a family. But looking at the empty, white-walled room now, I realized David never wanted a child. He wanted a hostage. He wanted me tethered to a cradle so I wouldn't notice he was siphoning the foundation of our life into a Cayman account. I was so close to becoming the woman he wanted me to be. A ghost in a beautiful house. I stood up and walked to the library. There was a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf filled with leadership books David had never read. Behind the third shelf, there was a seam in the wood. I pulled the lever I'd discovered during my 3 a.m. packing spree. The wall clicked open. Not to a safe full of cash, the feds had already taken that, but to my father's old drafting table. It was the one piece of furniture I'd insisted on keeping from his estate, though David had insisted it be hidden away because it didn't match the aesthetic. I ran my hand over the scarred oak surface. I noticed a small, circular indentation near the inkwell. I pulled the Phoenix key from my pocket, the one that had grounded Elena's tablet. I didn't use it as a ground rod this time. I pressed the base of the fob into the indentation. were. A hidden drawer slid out from the underside of the table. Inside wasn't a ledger or a thumb drive. It was a stack of old-fashioned, handwritten letters and a blueprint for a server architecture I'd never seen before. I read the first letter. It wasn't to me. It wasn't to Elena. It was to the third daughter Elena had mentioned in the note. To my youngest, Chloe, it began. If you are reading this, your sisters have likely found the first two keys. I hope they found them together, but I fear the fire I built into their blood. Maya has the logic. Elena has the drive. But you, Chloe, you have the heart of the system. The decentralized core. Do not let them sell it. Do not let the architects destroy the garden. My father hadn't just used us as a simulation. He had split his greatest achievement into 3 pieces because he knew that no one person should hold that much power. Not even his own children. He knew our flaws better than we knew ourselves. I looked at the blueprint. It wasn't a backdoor. It was a kill switch for the entire internet's centralized privacy, a way to return data to the people, once and for all. It was what Aegis was supposed to be before Bill Hendricks and David Miller got their hands on it. I realized then that my journey wasn't over. The court case was just a cleanup. The real work was finding Chloe. The sister I never knew I had. The one who held the final piece of the legacy. I grabbed the letters and the blueprint. I walked out of the bedroom, past the suits, past the empty nursery, and down to the kitchen. I didn't look at the $4,500 check on the counter, the one the board had sent as a parting gift. I didn't need it. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me. I didn't look back at the house. As I climbed into my new car, a modest, electric vehicle that I owned entirely, my phone buzzed. It was a private number. Maya? The voice was young, barely more than a whisper, but it had the same rhythmic cadence as my father's. Elena found me. She's at the gate. You have to get to Seattle. Now. The clouds below look like a vast, unwritten script. I'm 10,000 feet above the Rockies, heading toward a city I've never visited to meet a sister I never knew existed. My life in Naples is a closed tab, a memory of a woman who was once willing to shrink herself to fit into someone else's shadow. David is in a cell in Rayford. Bill Hendricks is facing a decade of federal oversight. And Nexus Systems? It's being carved up by creditors like a fallen beast. They thought they were the architects of my life, but they were just the scaffolding. And once the building is finished, you don't need the scaffolding anymore. You tear it down. Auratech is no longer a shell company. It is a force. I have 48 employees now, most of them women who were told they were too technical or not a culture fit at their old firms. We don't have a VP of sales. We don't have a charismatic face. We have code that works, and we have a leader who knows the value of every single line. I look at the Phoenix key sitting on my tray table. It's not just a ground rod or a decryption tool. It's a reminder. My father didn't leave us a fortune, he left us a test. He wanted to see if his daughters could move past the binary of winner and loser to become something more, a collective. Elena is still out there. She's desperate, she's brilliant, and she's already in Seattle. She thinks she can steal the heart of the system from Chloe. She doesn't realize that the heart only beats when the body is whole. I want you to look at your own life for a second. Look at the David in your office who takes the credit. Look at the Bill who tells you to be patient while he fills his own pockets. Look at that $4,500 bonus and ask yourself, am I the engine, or am I the fuel? Because fuel is meant to be burned. Engines are meant to drive. I spent 7 years being fuel. I let my love for a man and my loyalty to a brand blind me to my own power. I waited for permission to be great. I waited for someone to hand me a seat at the table. If you've watched my story this far and you still haven't subscribed, I want you to ask yourself why. Are you afraid of the fire? Are you comfortable in the shadow? If you don't hit that button, you're telling the world you're okay with the crumbs. You're siding with David. You're choosing the silence that nearly killed me. And to the ones who will subscribe, the ones who are ready to build their own Auratech, leave a comment below. Type I am the architect. Let the world know you're done being the ghostwriter for someone else's success. I'll be reading. I'll be watching. The pilot just announced our descent into Seattle. The rain is starting to streak across the window, my familiar, chaotic friend. I'm coming for you, Chloe. And Elena? I'm coming for you, too. But this time, I'm not bringing a contract. I'm bringing the truth.